Hey everyone, welcome. Excited to be here with you on I don't know if this is the first virtual meeting for the user group or not, but either way, it's exciting. There's a few engineers from my team that have also joined the call, so they're going to be able to help answer questions in the chat. Hopefully I don't miss any questions. I'm sure I will, but I'm going to try and pay attention to chat and present at the same time. Troubleshooting Autopilot with me, Spencer Shumway, Windows Autopilot PM. All right, well, let's get started then. I guess a little bit about myself. I have been at Microsoft for almost a year and a half now. I've been on the Autopilot team the whole time. So I sit right next to Michael Niehaus. Some of the glow from Michael, I hope, has shined off of him and absorbed into me. But yeah, I try and learn as much from him as I can, and we've been working together on a lot of this troubleshooting stuff. So hopefully you'll find some of this useful. Let's just look at some raw numbers here really quick. When we just had a meeting with some of our support folks, and it turns out that Windows Enrollment / Autopilot questions or service cases account for almost 50% of all enrollment questions in Intune. So these are case numbers for support cases opened from July till December. And as you can see, about each month or about half of all the cases. So I think a lot of you are probably working in and around these cases. Some of you may have opened these cases. So thanks. Some of you not thanks as much. No, I'm just kidding. Here's another way to look at it. As you can see, Autopilot and Windows is greater than probably all the rest of them combined. There's just a lot more complexity. That's how we explain it to our SLT. It's not our fault. But it probably is because we have a lot of work to do. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that we need to do to improve and what we've done to improve and how you guys can help us. Who would be surprised by a show? Actually, I'm not going to ask anyone to type in the chat because that'll just crash the chat. But I'm betting that not many of you are surprised that most of our support cases in Autopilot are around hybrid and white glove. And then there's a sweet spot in the middle where you get hybrid white glove issues. Those can be fun to troubleshoot. Lots of things can happen. We even have a couple threads going on right now where we're looking at some interesting behaviors between the two. Hybrid just has a few more configuration steps than regular Azure AD join scenarios. That's why there's just a few places that's easier to get tripped up on. And then there's also just legacy technology that we're integrating with. So it can be harder to troubleshoot. It can be harder to make everything integrate as seamlessly. That's probably best shown by some of the lack of capabilities we have on hybrid side as compared to Azure AD, specifically around naming. Many of you will probably notice that naming for Azure AD devices is a little bit better than hybrid devices. Right now, you can only add like a prefix. There's no templating. There's no custom naming. We're aware of that issue. We're working on it. So some of the common support cases we've seen over the last several months, and this is probably different than if we would have done this a year ago. These are not the same issues, but one common one is orphaned Autopilot devices. This happens oftentimes when people have test tenants or demo tenants and they register an Autopilot device there. Forget about it, the tenant expires and they go to try and use that device somewhere else and they can't. It still keeps booting back to the expired tenant and they can't access the tenant. So my advice to you all is just be very careful with the devices you're registering. Be aware of what's, expiration dates, stuff like that, because if your tenant is lost, if you lose access to your tenant, it's not that easy to get that device out of there. And that's by design. We don't want all of you to be able to delete each other's Autopilot devices, but just, yeah, beware of that. And then white glove plus hybrid issues with 1903, 1909, we had an issue where hybrid devices going through autopilot scenarios would fail. So one of the most common fixes we would have customers do is add a reg key to help with that. We can talk more about that in a bit. Time sync issues. We have quite a few time sync issues that have come up. We have a fix for some time zone or time sync issues that we backported into 1903, 1909 3D update. So if you're having time sync issues, try and get that update. And then TPM issues, always common issues, as you all know. When we see TPM issues, our kind of flow is try and reset the TPM. That doesn't work, try and update firmware, or try and make sure that your devices, if their firmware TPMs have access to the cert acquisition URLs. Those are kind of some of the common issues around TPM. Let's see. All right. Any burning questions come up so far? Nothing? All right. So whenever any of you file support cases with us, we're gonna always ask for the logs. Now for the logs for 1803, there's a different command that you use. It's licensing diag.exe -cab and then location of the output of the cab. For 1809 and above, we beefed up the diagnostics tool where it grabs a little bit more information, a little bit more useful information. You can specify a TPM flag that grabs extra TPM data that helps us see potentially more about what might have gone wrong. But yeah, there's stuff like event logs in there, TPM details, ETL files, registry configuration, stuff like that, device information about the device hashes in there. So just a lot of useful stuff. And for each of you, it'll also be useful if you know what it is. Michael put out a really good article. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, called Troubleshooting Autopilot or something. He has like a series of articles. But if you look them up, he has a list of useful log files. I've pulled out the ones that are high and medium usefulness. And we can just look at what actually comes in these logs. So you've got an autopilot DDS ZTD file, contains autopilot profile settings. You're going to have cert rec enroll AIK, that's TPM information. You've got your device hash in there, which is useful for us. You've got Intune and management extension logs, super useful for checking your Win32 app installations. You've got your AAD operational logs, your device management logs, and your modern deployment diagnostics logs. That's the one we mainly use for autopilot events. If you're having AAD join issues, you'll look at the AAD operational logs. And if you're having some sort of MDM issues, look at the device management enterprise diagnostics provider admin logs. And then another TPM set of information is the TPM HLIL info output.txt. Again, just some useful TPM data. Yeah. So I just gave you like a kind of a bit of a dump about all this information. When you gather logs, as many of you know, there's like this huge set of files and it's really daunting. We have kind of a vision that we're working towards right now where it's nice to have all that information, but oftentimes it's not super actionable for a lot of us. Oftentimes we have to go back to our engineers to look at it, and even then sometimes it's hard to parse through the data. So we're working right now on the Windows side, we want to have better errors. We want to have errors that come out on time. So for example, if you have some sort of an app failure, we could leave you sitting on ESP for your entire timeout duration, even though you timed out within the first 5 minutes. So we're adding improvements inside of the ESP to be a little bit more deterministic about failures, to be deterministic about syncs, so you can get the errors when they actually happen. It's just going to be a lot better experience for you. And then importantly, I think we're working towards centralizing all this information. We're trying to come up with ways that we can get all the relevant information into like a single log file rather than having it spread across 30 different log files. There's more to come on that. We don't have any hard commitments yet, but that's kind of what the vision is. And then obviously, as part of that, we need to validate connectivity, because as you go through this process, anywhere where you lose connectivity, it's going to be causing issues. And then on the Intune side, we have troubleshooting, monitoring, reporting, remote log collection, and configuration validation. So configuration validation being something that we like to call pre-flight checks. We want Intune to be able to offer kind of an alert on devices that look like they're not going to succeed in autopilot deployment. So reasons that a device may or may not succeed in autopilot deployment, we can discuss a little bit later. Remote log collection is actually available in Intune today, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. For reporting, some of you may know that we released the autopilot deployment report in February, and that's kind of the first attempt by us to give all of you basically a look at your autopilot estate and how many devices are deploying, how long they're taking, whether they're succeeding or failing. That report's still in preview, so we're working through some pipeline work items to make sure that it's reliable. And then we're also working to add more detail to the report so that it's actually useful for troubleshooting more than just reporting. So here's the remote log collection. I don't know if Oliver Kieselbach's on this call, it probably isn't, but he actually wrote a really good blog about how you would do this. But you can just on-demand collect logs, pretty useful. We're working towards building like a pre-configured set of logs, like an autopilot command that would just let you basically gather the autopilot relevant logs at this time. But we're just not quite there yet, so you still kind of have to do this custom OMA URI stuff. Intune troubleshooting is actually pretty nice right now. The biggest weakness I'd say that exists here is there's no device-based troubleshooting. So it's all user-based. Once you get to the user, though, you can look at the devices associated to the user. It's just a little less device-focused, and for autopilot, that often is difficult. So we're actually working on building out a device view for troubleshooting here. But if you want to go into this view and look at a user, you can look at the apps that were applied, the configuration policies that were applied, the compliance policies, all that stuff, whether they succeeded or failed. You can get error codes. Sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're not. But it's actually a really cool step in being able to just see the state of a device and the state of a user. Okay, this app install status page is kind of a branch off of that. You can go into the apps, see actual device statuses of how many devices the app is installed on, how many failed, things like that. So it's just kind of a pivot on that same type of a view where we're really trying to make it easy to, from a central location, being Intune, look out across the entire state of how your app installs are doing and be able to try and narrow down failure reasons or non-compliant users, things like that. We also have docs for all of this stuff, so generally linked to the docs here, and I can leave a copy of my presentation behind for those of you who want to go through it. Devices, device managed apps pane, same thing. So you can go to a device, and on that device, you can see the set of apps that are required, available, failed, success status, things like that, and drill in from that perspective. This is pretty useful as well. You can also grab the Intune management extension logs separately. This won't be available until after you actually used Intune management extensions on the device, so I guess that's probably common sense, but after you install Win32 up or a PowerShell, basically. They're uploaded and stored, and then once you do collect the logs, they'll show like in a hyperlink right here, and 2 hours or less SLA, pretty great. Okay, so autopilot device lifecycle is something we get a lot of questions about. There's a lot of confusion about it. We have probably a lot of support cases around lifecycle management, and not just support cases as well, but you know, customers trying to determine, hey, how are we going to handle? We just had 1,000 users laid off, or we're splitting our company and we have 10,000 users going to work at a new company. How are we going to handle this? So there's been some scripts written by a few field engineers out there, and a few customers I think have written scripts as well to basically clear out a device from your tenant. We're working on building a single place in Intune that you can do that with just a single button. It'll wipe the device from your whole tenant, the AAD record, Intune record, and the autopilot record. That's in the works though, so it's not here quite yet. Things to note though is when you upload a device, or when you register a device to Autopilot, so you take the CSV, you upload it through Intune, it's going to automatically create an AAD device, a pre-created AAD device, which you can then use for grouping and targeting. Sorry, so you'll use that device to assign your Autopilot profile to, and assign any apps, configuration, security profiles, any of that stuff is going to be targeted towards that pre-created Azure AD device. One of the biggest problems we see is that people will knowingly or unknowingly delete that device. And that basically kind of breaks the device from an autopilot perspective. And a lot of people will be like, well, why am I not getting autopilot experience? We've had several support cases around this where we just end up saying, no, you deleted the AAD device. So yeah, you can't get grouping and targeting, you can't get policy. So never, ever delete that device, please. I'm just asking, don't do it. We have an ask out on AAD right now to block the deletion of those devices, or at least provide strong warnings, so they're working on that. Don't delete it. It'll mess things up. Another interesting wrinkle on this is kind of goes along with the hybrid scenarios being a little bit less user-friendly than the Azure AD scenarios, is when doing a hybrid deployment, you'll have the pre-created object in AAD, but then when the offline domain join blob goes down to the device and the device joins the domain object becomes active and then becomes synced to AAD. So you now have two device objects in AAD for one physical device. And at the time that the device object from AD is synced up to Azure Active Directory, that then becomes the active device for policy, management, all of that stuff. So from that point on, if you're targeting things toward the pre-created device, they're not going to take effect on the hybrid device. So the only time that pre-created device actually takes effect is as the device is deployed. And I know it's super confusing. This problem kind of exacerbates a little bit when you redeploy that hybrid device, because you'll get an additional AD synced record every time you redeploy. Now we know this is not ideal, so we're working on at least limiting that object number growth, I guess you could say, whatever, so that every time AD syncs the device up, it just syncs to the same device instead of recreating new devices every time, but I'm still working on it. Checking device health, yeah. If you want to look and check for a device to make sure that it's working, just go to the Intune devices blade, click on it, or not the Intune, the Autopilot devices blade, click on a device. In the sidebar, it'll have an associated Intune device and an associated AAD device. If there is no associated AAD device, then that device is pretty much hosed. You just need to delete it, re-upload it. If there's no associated Intune device, not a big deal usually, because that device doesn't become active or created until the device enrolls. So there can be circumstances where Intune device object doesn't show up there. And then as you end of life a device, depending on how your company wants to handle this, if you really just want to get rid of the entire device, you need to delete the Intune device, like I said, the Autopilot device, and the Azure AD device. So, and then if that's hybrid, you can also delete the AD synced device as well. Okay, network troubleshooting, again, super important. We have a lot of issues around being able to access correct URLs. You can pop open a command prompt, ping stuff, see if it has access. We have network requirements listed in our docs. Some of those include like some Office URLs. We have TPM URLs that need to be accessible. So please check those out, make sure that they're working, and good luck. Okay, so Azure AD join failures. When we look at our support cases, we have significantly less support cases for Azure AD join user-driven deployments. They just usually work. They're easy to set up. There's not a lot of moving pieces. We have a lot of customers who've gone Azure AD only and have been able to deploy their entire enterprise with it. I mean, obviously, there's always going to be bumps in the road as you begin a deployment, but we've actually seen a lot of success with customers making this work. Some of the causes of problems when you do see issues is Azure AD join may not be enabled for the user. So basically setting your MDM scope and allowing AD join. There's a blade in AD where you can allow devices to join. You can allow a set number of devices to join in Azure AD. You can also do that in Intune, so enrollment restrictions. Previously, we've kind of had hard dependencies on branding being configured. So we generally recommend that you have branding configured. And then if you try and go through white glove without enabling white glove, that can be a problem. And then another big problem area here is third-party ID providers. So Ping and Okta, a lot of times there's a lot of handoffs there, and somewhere along the way those things get messed up. For those cases, we usually say talk to Ping or Okta, see why those aren't working, because we have no idea. But yeah, as far as Azure AD join, third-party federation is probably one of the bigger issues. Just people can misconfigure that, and we'll see problems there. Enrollment failures, again, these can be somewhat common. They'll manifest in a bunch of different ways. Frequent failures are node license being assigned, your automatic MDM enrollment is not configured correctly. We had a case maybe like a month ago, where customer kept saying, some of my users are not getting ESP, some of my users are getting weird, I think they were getting hello prompts, even though they had disabled them. And we spent all this time looking through all this different stuff and, investigating all these different areas. Turns out they just hadn't targeted their MDM scope to those users. So those users were not getting enrolled. They just hadn't targeted it. Super simple, should have checked that first thing. So I know it's always a simple thing. You all probably think that it's something to take for granted, but if you want to go into your Windows enrollment blade and look at your automatic enrollment blade, you want to make sure that MDM scope for enrollment is targeted towards all users. Or if you have it targeted towards some users for whatever your reason is, make sure that the users that you have targeted are actually, the users that are enrolling are the ones that you're targeting. And then obviously device enrollment restrictions, those can get you sometimes, whether it's device type or device limit. Another useful thing about those is if we go back to the device troubleshooting blade that I was talking about, you can actually see which enrollment restriction policies are applying to which user. So that's actually super useful because sometimes it's not super apparent. Conditional access can sometimes get in the way of enrollment. And then multiple MDM apps being configured. If you all know the Microsoft Intune enrollment app versus Microsoft Intune, if you're doing user list deployments, they will fail. We're building a fix right now to default to the Intune app to avoid those failures, but that's not deployed yet. So for now, just make sure that you just have the one MDM app configured. So enrollment status page, we actually get a lot of errors in and around enrollment status page. A lot of stuff comes to the Autopilot team because of this. We're kind of like the messenger. We always get shot, but we'll take it because we're happy to be, the face of the deployment. So in this phase, there's a lot that can go wrong. Enrollment can fail. TPM attestation can fail. App installation can fail, policy installations can fail. All that stuff will surface here during the ESP. And there's a myriad of reasons why. Usual reasons are app install failures. They'll retry. There's hybrid Azure AD join issues. App detection rules, those can be, if they're misconfigured, a problem. And then unable to install online store apps in Windows 10 1903. And I believe there's some conditional access issues around this where if you're requiring, basically, you don't want to gate everything, like never gate everything behind all cloud apps conditional access policies, because there's stuff that you may need access to that you might not be able to get, and then your device is going to fail. And then sometimes people, as you know, you can control the ESP timeout, where I've seen people set it like 10 minutes. They have 10 minutes and then it times out, and they're saying, oh, why did it fail? Well, you're pushing 25 apps, so it needs more time than 10 minutes. So just be aware of that. I think the default is 60 minutes right now. So sometimes it needs time. Michael put out a really new cool script where you can actually iterate through ESP tracked items and see their success and failure status. And you can see right here that we have an app specifically that failed. So we know that on the ESP UI, we actually have work to do in the sense that it doesn't really expose much useful information to the users, which is fine. The users don't care, but even to the IT pros, that are trying to troubleshoot the devices, there's really not much to go on. So this script is kind of a small response to that, in that you can actually go run it, see all what was applied, see what succeeded, what failed, and then you can actually use that app ID. And it doesn't use the name, but you can search the app ID through Graph to get the name of the app and see what happened. And you can go to the app install page and do stuff from there. I think Michael also added maybe some more functionality to search or pull the name of the app using the PowerShell script too. So go check that out. I've linked it in this presentation as well. Super cool for ESP troubleshooting. TPM attestation errors, the great and terrible errors. So basically your ESP is going to time out with, maybe not time out, but the TPM will time out and then it's going to fail. This usually happens around, I think, 12 minutes. It'll sit there on the device preparation phase, and then it will fail to join your organization, or it fail to secure your hardware, which is basically TPM. That by itself doesn't necessarily mean there was a TPM failure, but usually it does. Scenarios where this matters are generally the userless scenarios, so white glove and self-deploying mode. Because they're userless scenarios, we don't have any user auth to authenticate the device, so we require TPM attestation, which is the strongest attestation that we can get, that a device is who it says it is, and no one's spoofing that device. So causes of these TPM failures, they don't work on VMs. So if you're using a VM, it doesn't work. TPM 1.2 won't work. You need to have TPM 2.0. And even if you do have TPM 2.0, depending on the age of the device, it still may not work. So generally you need newer devices. We're building out a dashboard right now to kind of tell us ages versus attestation success failures. And hopefully we're going to be able to get some good insights on that, so we can provide recommendations of, hey, you need to be on a year or newer device or things like that. Or maybe we'll find that there is no correlation between age. But from what we've seen from customer deployments and from support cases, that generally newer devices are more likely to succeed in TPM attestation. So what can you do? What can you do to like help with TPM attestation? Well, you can update the firmware. Some sets of TPM firmware have known issues. So you can go to your OEM and find on their website what TPM firmware is needed and download that and apply that. If a device can't obtain an EK cert, depending on the device type, that'll be a problem. So trying to update firmware may or may not help. Using an older TPM device that doesn't support EK certs, that's like what I was talking about. If the device is too old, it just won't work. And then with Windows 10 1809, this is a good example of this, that attestation probably only works anywhere from 20 to 50% of the time. So for that reason, we pulled self-deploying mode and white glove off 1809. We said 1809 is not supported for these scenarios. We find a lot better success rates in 1903 and above. So use 1903 and above, use newish hardware, because the TPM manufacturers, they've gotten better over the last couple of years. Everyone's kind of pulling together, trying to make this whole ecosystem work. And it is working. It's getting better. So hopefully in the next month or two, we'll have a bit more hard numbers around success rates and age of devices and all that. But for now, use newer devices, use 1903 and above. And again, update firmware, reset TPM, and make sure that your TPM, make sure that your device has access to EK cert acquisition URLs, which we have documented in our Autopilot networking docs. Okay, so If a device acts like it's not registered, first you need to make sure that the profile is assigned. Make sure that a profile wasn't cached. Make sure that the profile was assigned and that the device hadn't connected to a network before the profile was assigned. If it does, then you can shut the device down. Use in the command prompt, use a shutdown/r/t0, and you can download a new Autopilot profile that way. For 1803 and previous devices, there was a profile caching issue. So once the profile was given to the device, it would basically just hold on to that profile. So you would need to re-image the device or run sysprep generalize. For newer devices, that's not really a problem. But yeah, generally make sure profile is assigned, make sure device has network connectivity. And then, yeah, go from there. So let's move on. Okay, so hybrid Azure AD join process does not complete. This one happens a decent amount. The ESP will time out. The device joins Azure Active Directory but times out. You're not going to get any user policies from Intune. Single sign-on doesn't work with AD. This usually happens when hybrid AD join background process doesn't complete. ADFS is a little bit faster than AAD Connect because there's a 30-minute sync window on AD Connect. There are networking related problems with this. So we find a lot of customers who have block lists or allow lists, things like that, where devices can't access all AAD endpoints have problems. And then devices may not get synced from AD to AAD due to misconfigurations. So like if you exclude the OU that the devices are in, things like that. So those are things to check out. You can check the output of dsreg cmd status to see if the join is completed. Check AAD event logs. I've listed those AAD event logs up earlier. Yeah, check your AAD Connect config, and then make sure that there's two devices in AAD, like we talked about. There's the pre-created and then the AD sync device. And then again, with third-party federation, make sure they're configured properly. We see a lot of issues around that. Here we go, link to our docs, some of Michael's blog posts, some of our known issues. So I'll just leave that in here. So just for best practices, we want to use physical machines with self-deploying and white glove. White glove also requires Ethernet because it needs to be able to download and access the white glove flow before the Autopilot profile could have been downloaded with a network connection. So for hybrid scenarios, you can actually use virtual machines or even user-driven scenarios. And it's actually super useful when you can snapshot at the beginning of Ubi. You can snapshot the device being unenrolled in device settings, things like that. It's also nice testing hybrid Azure AD join scenarios. Just be careful. It can be difficult to roll back and stuff. If you are having strange issues with targeting, things like that, you might just want to deregister the device, delete the AD device, delete the Azure Active Directory device, delete it all and just start over. It's not a bad idea sometimes, especially if you're deploying a device, 4 times in a row. There's going to be, all of a sudden you have 5 AAD records associated with the same physical device object. It could get confusing. Just to keep things clean, there's nothing wrong with wiping it out and starting all over again. Testing one thing at a time. Yeah, this is big. We don't want someone who has never done an Autopilot deployment to all of a sudden decide, I'm going to test hybrid Azure AD join using VPN and certs, device certs. Like, you don't want to go from 0 to 100 like that. you want to test something small first. Start with Azure AD join user driven. And if that works, try a self-deploying mode device. You work your way up into it. Don't go from 0 to 100. Like you're not able to test what you changed and all that if you do that. We might talk about grouping and targeting later, but add simple configurations one at a time. Maybe add an app. Maybe try a security configuration, something like that. Add things on one at a time to make sure that, if you can configure like a big security baseline, you don't know all the policies that are coming on the device. You don't know how they're going to affect things. So yeah, just start small again. And then always gather failure details. Just like I said, use those the capture log commands, because we're always going to ask for them. And you're going to need to know how to grab the logs. You're probably going to need to know how to look through the logs, to be honest. So gather logs always. And then if you have something that you can't figure out, best thing is, I know everyone loves to email Michael or email a distribution list. That can also be helpful, but opening a support case is probably the best thing to do, because that helps us get engineering attention on the problem. So if you have an Intune tenant, you get this for free. So just go to the help and support node and ask to have it transferred to Intune. Okay, so this is basically the end of the presentation. We're also in private preview for BYO VPN right now. So if any of you have customers who are doing hybrid Azure AD join, or you are personally doing hybrid Azure AD join already, and you have SkepCert infrastructure set up, and you're interested in using VPN to deploy hybrid devices from anywhere in the world, please contact me. It's in private preview, but we're looking to push for public preview in the next month or two. So reach out to us, and that's all.
Okay, Spencer, thank you. If you have any further questions, can you please put them in chat now? If you want to use audio, just put a question mark by your name, and we'll unmute you so you can ask the question.
Yeah, we do have a VPN question. So yeah, Faisal, we do have, like I said, BYO VPN is what we're calling it, kind of a thing. I don't know if that'll be the public name, but internally that's what it is that you'll be able to work with whatever your VPN client is currently. So for example, Cisco and eConnect, we've had customers already validate this. You need your VPN client to have some sort of pre-logon authentication. So for Cisco and eConnect, the protocol is called start before login. And what happens is that you configure your VPN to basically work when the user hits the Windows sign-in screen. So if they're deploying remotely and they don't have line of sight to the domain controller, you need your VPN to kick in before they try and auth. So that can be done with always on VPN, which we're validating internally right now, or with the third-party VPNs where they allow you to make a pre-logon connection. So yeah, that actually does work. Okay, so Brian said, is White Glove also going to be able to use in future on wireless connections and VM? Faisal said, thanks. Okay, so yeah, you can kind of use White Glove today with a workaround, but generally it's required to use Ethernet. I don't know are we planning on making a public change to that, Michael?
Have a work item. We do have a work item on our backlog to do that. Talked about just adding a button to make a Wi-Fi connection. The reason we don't support it today is that we don't want to navigate through the language locale keyboard screens in Ubi to make the network connection, because then those values are locked and the end user may not be able to change them. So if we added something, it would be probably a button on the White Glove page itself to make a Wi-Fi connection from there. I do have a blog that talks about the workaround, which is pressing Shift F10 to open a command prompt. Then you can open the Wi-Fi page from a command line and make the connection that way. So it works fine over Wi-Fi. It's more a question of the sequencing of events and what we do and don't want from the end user perspective.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any questions that I missed, or did Michael answer them all in the chat already?
All right, sir. Thank you very much, Spencer. We greatly appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you all for taking the time to listen. And do I leave a copy with you, Randall, and then you can just disperse the deck, or how we, like, if people want the deck?
Yeah, work with Greg and he'll get that up on our website.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yep. We'll do that. Thanks, Spencer.
Thanks, everyone.